I've described Hercule Poirot's Christmas as my favorite Agatha Christie adaptation, and it's true, I love it, flaws and all. But there's another film that follows close behind it, which I consider to be near flawless, despite so many changes made from the book, which was also quite good. Evil Under the Sun, released in 1982, adapted by Anthony Shaffer and directed by Guy Hamilton, was Peter Ustinov's second outing as Poirot and the third installment of the EMI film's Poirot franchise. It was based on the 19th novel to feature Poirot, published in 1941, which was also adapted into a TV film by Anthony Horowitz for the series Agatha Christie's Poirot, starring David Suchet, in 2002. I could try to compare the two adaptations to decide which is better, but let's be honest, one of them has Maggie Smith, so... The book opens at the Jolly Roger Hotel off the Devonshire coast. Hercule Poirot is on vacation there, along with Emily Brewster, Major Barry, Reverend Stephen Lane, Horace Blatt, Mr. and Mrs. Gardner, Patrick and Christine Redfern, Rosamund Darnley, Kenneth Marshall, his daughter Linda, and his wife, Arlena. Arlena has a personality that tends to rub people the wrong way, her stepdaughter Linda in particular, and also Christine when Arlena and Patrick start flirting. Christine ends up literally crying on Poirot's shoulder. Whatever feelings Kenneth might have about his wife's behavior, he seems to keep bottled up. Rosamund, who's been in love with Kenneth for years, tries to convince him to leave Arlena. One morning, Linda looks up from a book she borrowed at a local shop and decides to act on her hatred for Arlena. It's not clear what she intends, but the first thing she does is to go out and buy some candles, then makes arrangements to go to the beach with Christine. Poirot assists Arlena in launching a boat. He thinks she's on her way to meet Patrick, but Patrick appears a minute later and makes it plain he thought he'd be meeting Arlena here. Eventually he asks to join Miss Brewster in her boat row around the island. They see Arlena sunbathing in Pixie Cove, except there's no sun to bathe in.
Oh my God. She's dead. She's been murdered. Strangled.
Both films start out with the discovery of a victim in the past, something we haven't yet been told about in the book. In the Peter Ustinov film, Poirot is peripherally involved in that investigation and ends up going to the island to help Sir Horace Blatt recover a diamond he says has been stolen by his ex-fiancée, Arlena Marshall. So despite Poirot swearing to Blatt in the book that he's not on a case, here he is on a case, and he's working, in a sense, for Blatt. The location of the island has been changed to the fictional country of Tyrrhenia, which I think is based on Albania, in the Adriatic Sea. The name of the hotel is never mentioned, though Blatt's yacht now bears the name the Jolly Roger. Maggie Smith plays Daphne Castle, the proprietor of the hotel, whose character has been merged with that of Rosamund Darnley. Arlena is played by Diana Rigg, Odell Gardner by James Mason, and Roddy McDowall plays a flamboyant novelist named Rex Brewster, the film's replacement of Emily Brewster. The characters Stephen Lane and Major Barry are left out. While Poirot waits for Blatt to arrive via his yacht, we get to know all the suspects. Those who didn't have motives for killing Arlena in the book are given motives. The book only hinted that Patrick and Arlena arranged to meet here at the hotel, whereas the film makes it very clear. Despite many plot changes, several scenes feature dialogue that comes straight from the book, almost word for word, particularly between Poirot and Christine, Daphne and Kenneth, and the scene where Poirot overhears Patrick and Christine fighting. Patrick in the book is portrayed as a horny man who's helpless to resist a temptress like Arlena. In the film, he's just as horny, but doesn't give off any helpless vibes at all. Although Daphne has replaced Rosamund, her fundamentals are still the same. She's a successful businesswoman pining for her childhood sweetheart. Christine and Kenneth are probably the most book-accurate characters, one dizzy from vertigo and complaining about everyone pitying her, the other disapproving of people who don't follow through on commitments, and being insensitive to the psychological harm his marriage is causing his daughter.
By the way, Linda, have you seen your mother?
No, thank God.
Now, Linda, I won't tell you again.
In the book, Arlena is not deliberately unkind to Linda, but nevertheless she makes her miserable. Film Arlena goes out of her way to bully Linda, who is quite justified in calling her a bitch. There's more to both these characters, but I'll talk about that a little later. After helping Arlena launch her boat, Poirot gives us the eternal gem of a scene where he swims. Shortly afterward, the body is discovered, but instead of Patrick and Brewster, it's Patrick and Mrs. Gardner. In the opening of the Suchet film, the discovery of the earlier victim, Alice Corrigan, is juxtaposed with a passionate sermon by Reverend Stephen Lane. Like in the book, he's a fanatic about the true existence of evil, but in the film we find out right away that fanaticism is directed primarily at women. The geography of the Jolly Roger Hotel is book accurate this time, except it's now called the Sandy Cove Hotel.
For the last couple of years, it's been run as a health resort. It's highly recommended.
Poirot's doctor orders him to go there after he gets food poisoning at Captain Hastings' new Argentinian restaurant, though we won't know it was food poisoning until the end. So yes, all the TV show's regulars are here. Hastings, Miss Lemon, and Inspector Japp. The last time they'd all be together until their reunion a decade later. I'm glad we got to see them all one last time, although they take up so much screen time that the introduction of all the suspects feels forced and rushed. This time Mr. and Mrs. Gardner are the characters who are left out, though Major Barry is less loquacious and a lot more cryptic than his book counterpart. Actually, there is another character left out. Linda. She's been replaced by Kenneth's son, Lionel. No offense to Russell Tovey, but Linda was a much more compelling character. I like how Linda develops a kinship with Christine because they both hate the same person. Here it seems less like friendly bonding and more like a boyhood crush. As for the other characters, Kenneth becomes more pouty, and Rosamond is reduced to a vehicle for exposition, though I found it interesting that while in the book she assumed that Kenneth fell for Arlena, here she thinks he married her for her money. Horace Blatt still functions as a red herring, with his red sails and white sails and his overreacting to the mention of Pixie Cave. Emily Brewster is pretty accurate, though in the film they have her explain to Poirot why a vacation hotel is a perfect spot for a murder, instead of him telling her. After meeting the other guests, Poirot predicts to Hastings that murder is a possibility. This parallels a flash-forward in the book, but here in the film it's a motivation for Poirot to try to prevent the murder. A common theme to many Agatha Christie stories is that even when you recognize the signs that someone is going to attempt homicide, that homicide is extremely difficult to prevent. So I found this an interesting change, especially considering what we find out at the end of the book. One more thing before moving on. When I first saw this film, I could tell that this version of Arlena wasn't quite right, but I couldn't put my finger on why. I knew that I didn't like how they introduced her. Arlena's core characteristic is that she's always the center of drama. You can't just introduce her by going, "See that lady over there?" She can only appear by making an entrance with a capital E. Finally, I realized that this Arlena's attitude is, I'm going to do whatever I want and I don't care if it hurts your feelings, whereas her book counterpart seems to genuinely forget or is unaware that other people even have feelings. It's like this film tried to stay faithful to the book while also making her like the Diana Rigg version, and the end result was a watered-down version of both. In the book, Poirot sits in on the police interviews and listens as the suspects give their alibis. He's especially interested in each suspect's perspective on the character of the victim, which he stresses is always a pivotal factor in a murder case. Most characters maintain their view that Arlena was mean, conniving, evil. Christine says she was a useless parasite. Mr. Gardner says she was a darned fool. Next, the police search the suspect's rooms, and Poirot is disturbed by the remains of something burned in Linda's fireplace. He also places significance in a bottle thrown from a hotel window that almost hit Miss Brewster, and a bath which a maid heard being run in one of the hotel rooms and no one admits having taken.
A bath which nobody admits having taken, and a bottle which flies by itself.
When visiting the crime scene, Poirot detects the scent of perfume inside Pixie's cave. It's a perfume worn by Arlena and Rosamond. The police find an innocent-looking tin inside the cave that contains heroin. It's eventually discovered that Horace Blatt is a dope smuggler, explaining why he sometimes uses red sails on his boat instead of white, a signal to those picking up the heroin. Linda's increasingly nervous behavior becomes a subject of concern to multiple people. Poirot asks her to trust him, but she won't let him help her. Rosamond encourages her to forget all about this unpleasantness, but that's easier said than done. It turns out the book she was reading earlier was about witchcraft and untraceable poisons. The police find evidence that leads them to believe Arlena was being blackmailed. They conclude that the murder was tied into either blackmail, drug smuggling, or a crime of passion, but Poirot seems to think it was none of these. He researches cases of strangulation from the past few years and is interested by the murder of Alice Corrigan, in which case the only suspect, the husband, had an alibi due to the testimony of a woman hiker who found the body. The police inspector takes note that Alice died not too far from Stephen Lane's parish. Poirot shocks everyone by suggesting a picnic. Most everyone goes along, and to their surprise, they have a good time. But when they return, they find Linda has attempted suicide, leaving a note in which she confesses to having killed Arlena. In the 1982 film, with the story taking place in a fictional country, Poirot ends up investigating on his own. Since most everyone's motives have already been made plain, he mainly interrogates people about their whereabouts that morning, while narrowing down the time of the murder. Some characters in the book remembered the chiming of the church bell nearby to establish where they were at noon. The film replaces the church bell with,
"Don't worry, darling, it's only the noonday gun."
The noonday gun?
Poirot finds no stash of heroin in the cave, but he does find the false diamond. Horace Blatt, who's just arrived, says he threw it at Arlena when he arrived, and left her alive, citing his crew watching him as an alibi. In fact, everyone seems to have an alibi.
How very irritating.
Nevertheless, after timing himself crossing the island and examining clues from the Alice Corrigan murder, though her name has been changed to Alice Ruber, Poirot announces that he's ready to produce the solution. Poirot's interrogations are interspersed with Daphne trying out various theories, and they're probably the best scenes in the movie. Like her book equivalent, she lies to try to give Kenneth an alibi, but Poirot sees through it right away. In fact, in the book, only a few characters had alibis, and since one of those characters was Kenneth, this drew a lot of suspicion toward him. But by giving alibis to all the suspects, the film turned it into a plot point. How can the mystery be solved if no one could have committed the murder?
You mean nobody did it?
And yet we still have a body, madame.
The film chose to adopt a much lighter tone for the story. That's why Stephen Lane, although he was a very interesting character, was left out. Mr. Gardner's personality changes from intelligent and reserved to cynical and sarcastic. Other plot elements were also left out that gave the story more of a thriller quality, like Rosamund telling Linda to keep silent because she thinks the girl knows her father killed Arlena, which Linda misinterprets as Rosamund telling her she knows that she, Linda, is guilty. Unlike the Ustinov, the David Suchet film retains the book's focus on the character of Arlena Marshall, with some slight changes. For instance, the letter they find addressed to Arlena seems to indicate blackmail, while in the book it appeared to be the writing of an obsessed lover, but in both cases the letter hints at Arlena's true nature. I liked that the film gave Miss Lemon the chance to do some detective work on her own, like investigating the murder of Alice Corrigan. I also liked that they kept Poirot's line from the book,
"In this case, there is indicated very clearly one person. But there is what you might call the snag, because it seems impossible for this person to have committed the crime."
As intended, we're meant to think he's talking about Kenneth. Some minor changes. Lionel's glasses are found at the scene of the crime, the book he borrowed was only about poisons, not witchcraft, and the source of Stephen Lane's fanaticism is hinted at when it's revealed his wife left him for one of his parishioners. The book mentions a couple who appear briefly at the island and are later revealed to be part of the smuggling gang there to pick up the heroin. In the film, our heroes lie in wait for them, and when the smugglers are caught, they pull out a gun. Fortunately, Major Barry's there to save the day. He's from the Home Office, working undercover. In the book, following Linda's suicide attempt, it's unclear whether she'll survive. Poirot begins to explain to a heartbroken group of hotel guests why it makes sense she's the murderer. Until he suddenly turns it around and accuses Patrick, along with his accomplice, his wife, Christine. Or maybe not really his wife, but at any rate his partner. Enraged, Patrick loses it and tries to strangle Poirot. After the killers are taken away, Poirot reveals what he's known all along, that Arlena's mindless personality made her a natural victim, not a manipulator or predator, as everyone thought. Marshall married Arlena for the same reason he married his first wife, who was wrongfully thought to be a murderer. He married her out of pity. He felt sorry for her. Stephen Lane was only partially right about her. She was connected with evil, but that evil was targeting her. That evil, Poirot has long suspected, was Patrick Redfern. The letter everyone misinterpreted actually showed how easy it was for men to trick Arlena out of her money. Patrick wanted to kill her before Kenneth found out. He arranged it so he'd discover the body along with a witness, but that body would actually be Christine in disguise. Once the witness left, Patrick would strangle Arlena, who, per Patrick's instructions, had been hiding in the cave. Christine used artificial suntan to stain her arms and legs, then chucked the bottle away. After posing as Arlena, she took a bath to get the tan off. Despite the impression she created that she's frail and physically limited, Christine is actually quite athletic, as proven by Poirot during the picnic excursion. She used Linda and the alteration of Linda's wristwatch to procure an extra alibi. Christine and Patrick have experience fabricating alibis, like they did when they conspired to murder Alice, Patrick's wife. The killers had planned to frame Kenneth, but then they changed their minds and chose Linda instead. It was Christine who induced Linda to commit suicide. Linda,
who did not die,
still believes herself culpable of murder, since she had cast a spell to kill Arlena, and then Arlena died. But Poirot impresses upon her that wishing someone dead and actually committing murder are two completely different things. Since both films leave out the suicide attempt, Act 3 starts with Poirot saying, "I'm ready to present the solution," though in one film the tone is very light, while in the other it's more serious. In the Ustinov version, since Arlena is a gold-digging meanie, as everyone thought, there's nothing to unpack about her character, and Poirot jumps right away into deconstructing Patrick and Christine's alibis. One clue added for the film is that while Rex and Christine both said they were with Linda at noon, neither of them saw the other. So one of them must be lying.
You're not at all the romantic figure you like to present, monsieur. You are a hardened adventurer and a vicious swindler.
Patrick's motive is condensed to the stolen diamond specifically, which it turns out is hidden in his pipe. For a minute it seems like the killers are going to get away with it for lack of proof, but then Poirot, with Daphne's help, tricks Patrick into writing his signature. Poirot had already figured out that Patrick is Felix Ruber, since Felix Ruber is Latin for red fern, and that he killed his wife Alice. The signatures match. That's when Patrick finally assaults him. Overall, the Suchet version sticks more closely to the source material. Poirot does pronounce Arlena a predestined victim, but before he exposes Christine and Patrick, he gets a little sidetracked going over everyone's motives, an action which had purpose in the book, but here in the film, where he's not trying to elicit an emotional response from Patrick, it seems done for the sake of melodrama. I do like that rather than go to the trouble of getting a photo of Patrick and Christine to match up with Alice's husband and the hiker, Poirot simply asks Stephen Lane, who was there at the time of Alice's murder, if he recognizes Patrick, which he now does. It's a much better use of Lane's character and ties up the theme that the presence of evil can be felt. It's just hard to identify. As I've said, the Suchet adaptation is the more faithful of the two films, but I can't place it among his best. Apart from the leads, the characters are dull and aren't given much to do besides convey information. Moreover, there are a number of points that don't make sense. For instance, in the flashback, why does Christine scream when there's no one around to hear her? And Poirot mentions that he suspected Patrick all along, which in the book he does, but when he argues with him early on, even though it's similar to an argument in the book, I don't think he has any idea Patrick has ulterior motives. If he'd said later that that was his way of warning Patrick, I might have bought it, but he doesn't. There's also the change from Linda to Lionel. The book stressed that Arlena tended to make enemies of women. Linda, as the principal red herring, was the epitome of that pattern. Since the film did away with the attempted suicide, there might not have been any reason to keep her female, but the only effect of changing her gender was to reduce their character depth. At least with the Ustinov version, even though they left out Linda's full arc, they gave her other things to do to make up for it. The Peter Ustinov adaptation, though looser, is by far the stronger film. True, it left out a lot of elements from the book, including ones I liked, but it wasn't done out of lack of story comprehension or a misguided attempt to make the story more dramatic. The filmmakers simply had a specific tone they were going for. They kept all the book elements they could that would fit with that tone, and changed or added new ones that fit with those book elements perfectly. And then there are the other bonuses, the actors, the location, the Cole Porter music, the use of style and fashion to convey personality, especially in Christine's case, and little moments we never got in the book, like when Christine and Patrick are finally able to act as themselves. Until further notice, for what it's worth, I declare this film the best Agatha Christie adaptation in existence. It is a pity that neither film gives us Linda's full story with her attempt at witchcraft, although Christie did reuse that device in a later work. I hope to see you when I talk about that. Thanks for watching.